Why has the church suddenly become so vocal about immigration issues? Is it to remind us about what Jesus said about the poor and the marginalized? Stay tuned, because there is a lot more to this story than just preaching the gospel. Hello, and welcome to the Chaplain's Corner After Hours, a place to discuss stories the mainstream media ignores that can actually impact our Christian walk and our spiritual journey. Chaplain Warren and Chaplain Nan are your hosts, and we're glad to have you with us. The recent inauguration of Donald Trump as the 47th president brings a whole new era to the American illegal immigration story. It is conservatively estimated that well over 11 million illegal immigrants are in our country, having violated either U.S. Code 1325 on illegal entry or 1326 on illegal re-entry. 4 years of open borders during the Biden-Harris administration have seen a flood of criminals, terrorists, and drugs into our country, with often devastating effects to health, local economies, overburdened schools and hospitals, and an estimated 300,000 overdose deaths from fentanyl alone. Many illegal immigrants receive rather lavish government benefits, and a lot of those benefits end up being remitted to the home countries of the illegals, amounting to an estimated $81 billion of taxpayer funds in 2022 alone. As efforts to secure the border rapidly ramp up, and as the largest catch and deport operation in our nation's history begins, many voices are heard protesting the new stance on illegal immigration. And some of the harshest and most prominent of those voices come from various church denominations. And so in this first of 4 episodes on immigration, politics, and the church, we look into why the church is suddenly placing itself publicly at odds with the new presidential administration on this particular issue. And so before we jump into the specifics, I just want to ask Chaplain Nan if you have any opening thoughts on how I have teed up this issue today.
I guess I just want to ask, where have all these organizations that are now yelling and saying how awful, what's trying to really make people, ordinary citizens, safe so we can go to school, go to work, and have sort of civil society. What is going on about that? In that, where were you all, as I call it, the great silencio, the great silence, from every corner while money was being poured into these entities to, help people escape these terrible places, which now they're saying, they got to go back to these terrible places. And my question is, where were you and where are you now to help make why people don't need to leave their homeland? Nobody wants to leave their homeland. My mind cannot wrap itself around why, for all these decades, total silence, total silencio about, unless they were trying, and they were so helpless, they couldn't do anything except get people out of the line of fire, if you will, of poverty or unemployment or, terrible, terrible crime and drugs and cartels and all those terrible things. But how come none of these organizations, none of these churches are doing anything or have said anything or stood up, or even halftime, right? Like half the time talk about what they're doing to try and make things better in those countries so that people don't need to leave their homeland and their families. Well, why isn't the church doing something about why those people are having to leave? at the same time, if somebody's sick or starving, or I'm not saying don't help them, I'm just saying at least equal time. But I hear total silence, and I guess this might be right. So that's all I have.
Well, and I think those questions are the kinds of questions that have probably gone through the minds of most Americans, or at least a majority of Americans. Why is it there's this flood of immigration, not just into our country, but good grief, look at Europe, particularly France, Sweden, the UK. I mean, for all intents and purposes, the UK has ceased to be the historic UK. And so we're gonna over the next 3 episodes after this one, we're going to dig into some of those factors. But I first want to highlight 2 of the loudest and, in some ways the rudest voices of the church over the last couple of weeks. And, the first church denomination that came out swinging was the Episcopal Church, in the person of Mary Ann Buddy, the bishop of the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., which is run by the Episcopal Church. And this was the day after the inauguration, at a national prayer service for the new president and the vice president and their families. And so in her long, rambling sermon about national unity, with a very brief nod to Jesus as the basis for true unity, she launches into a direct accusation that, and I quote, that there are transgender children in both Republican and Democrat families who fear for their lives. Where did that come from? And then she follows that disconnected thought with another disconnected thought that, and I quote, the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals, unquote. Well, not only do I agree with her on that point, but by his praise of legal immigrants, so does President Trump. The bishop attempts to sidestep her illogical thinking with a standard plea directed at the president, which carries just as little logical thought, where she says, and I quote, have mercy, Mr. President, on those in our communities whose children fear that their parents will be taken away. Help those who are fleeing war zones and persecution in their own lands to find compassion and welcome here, unquote. The bishop conveniently forgets the president's efforts are directed not on persecuting people, but they're directed toward mercy on U.S. citizens who have been murdered, raped, robbed, displaced from housing by brutal gangs, and the terrorists and the psychopaths who are waging war on our country from within. Now, next up came the Roman Catholic Church. A little more low-key, a little more reasoned, but nonetheless very direct. Even before the inauguration, Pope Francis labeled impending deportation plans as, I quote, a disgrace, unquote. And on January 22nd, 2 days after the inauguration, the president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference criticized some of President Donald Trump's initial executive orders on key issues, including immigration, saying that some provisions contained in the executive orders, such as those focused on the treatment of immigrants and refugees, foreign aid, and expansion of the death penalty, and the environment, are deeply troubling and will have negative consequences, many of which will harm the most vulnerable among us. Well, like the Episcopal bishop, he had nothing to say of the suffering that massive illegal immigration and drugs have had on vulnerable Americans, or the massive evil of human trafficking abetted by the mass illegal immigration, and particularly against children, where the Biden-Harris administration lost track of over 300,000 children. Now, given the statistical realities of illegal immigration, why has the church been so silent during the Biden-Harris administration, which enabled all the evil, but now in a matter of days after the inauguration of President Trump, they jump into full-throated, what I call Bible-thumping mode, to rail against efforts to end the nightmare against humanity? So why is this? Well, I'm not going to be coy, or I'm not going to tiptoe around the issue, because the issue is, quite frankly, money.
Which we just found out, thanks to Elon Musk, is a huge portion of what is just found in one agency, the U.S. Aid Agency, where all these programs supposedly to help these people being so oppressed had nothing to do with anything, like a transgender opera.
Yeah.
Right? Millions of dollars for, or hundreds of thousands of dollars for a transgender opera. Not something to do with people who were homeless or in danger or starving or needing medicine.
No, that's right. And you know, what's so interesting about what is being revealed is the money flows are even larger than researchers have been able to find in previous years, and the broad spectrum of causes, just wacko causes that the money is going to, is far, far broader than anybody had any idea about. And so it's not just about money, it's about a whole lot of money. And you might ask, how much is a whole lot of money? Well, during the Biden-Harris administration, those 4 years, Catholic Charities received a minimum of $3 billion in immigration funding and $5.2 billion total since 2009. And I say a minimum because those numbers are direct remittances from U.S. aid to those agencies. It doesn't count aid that goes to other intermediate agencies, which then pass that government money on to Catholic Charities. Various NGO arms of the Lutheran Church, and I hope you're sitting down before I say this one. But
first, tell us what NGO, because people use that a lot and nobody knows what that means.
Non-government organization.
Otherwise known as charities.
It's basically the business arm, in this context, it's the business arm of a church, which is not a business, but this is the business arm of the Lutheran Church. The Lutheran Church, like I said, sit down, received $600 million from the government in 2024. But the reality is that $600 million was remitted to the Lutheran Church in December. In December, they received that $600 million. Now, how much of that is pure immigration funding? It's hard to identify because they chop it up in so many different ways. But once again, it's probably a minimum number because Lutheran Charities, just like Catholic Charities, also receives funds from other intermediaries who have also received money from the government. It is a real tangled web. And then, not to be left out, although it's in third place, the Episcopal Church,
otherwise known as the bishop who, on the day after his inauguration,
tongue-lashed the president.
Correct, it from the altar.
Yeah, the pulpit. The Episcopal Church reportedly received $53 million in immigration funding in 2022. Quite likely more than that in 2023 and 2024, but 2022 is the last IRS filing that is on record. So at this point,
see how non-transparent things are.
So, and you know, and we're not even talking about who knows how many other NGOs, non-religious NGOs, have also received money and in many cases have passed that money on to the religious NGOs. And so, in one respect, this problem of the church and money are as old as mankind. As you recall, Jesus grabbed a whip of cords to drive the money changers and the animal sellers out of the temple in Jerusalem because they were kicking money back to the priestly class. So, it's nothing new. It's just the magnitude of it has grown immensely, and the hubris or the entitlement or whatever you want to call it, that, this is our mission, this is God's mission, is just beyond the pale. And so the drive of the Trump administration to stop the waste of American tax money is having the additional consequence of exposing the dirty laundry of the church for all of us to see. Do you have any comments on the money issue there?
I could go on and on and on about it. Just something that never makes sense to me is if you're in your own personal life, in your own home, if you're like so in debt that they're going to come take your house or you're going to have to file for bankruptcy, imagine that's kind of like where we're at in the country with our, how many trillions of dollars are we in debt?
36 trillion, give or take a little bit.
We as in the people we elected, right? So it's on us that we put people in place to borrow money, right? Go and get money that we have to pay back with interest so that we could assign to an organization somebody to be in charge of writing a check to another country for what they need. But we are the ones, it's not like we have money and this is like our surplus or our tithe. We are actually in debt. We are in debt up to our eyeballs. And so one thing is for basic human needs, the other is this just industry of its own, which found a way. It's like capitalism undercover, right? Calling itself an NGO. They just take in money and spread it out. And the money is coming from our people who are in debt every single day, needing more and more money for loans to help this, which is not help, which at the same time is causing all these problems on our soil.
Well, and people's loyalties can be blinded by this money thing. I mean, we've been talking about the church, but in researching one of the NGOs, and this is going to pertain to an upcoming episode, in researching one of the religious NGOs, and I'll keep it quiet who it is right now, but the CEO of the particular religious NGO, which I think this one had something on the order of $100 million in government receipts in 2024. His salary, total compensation, was in the neighborhood of $800,000 to $850,000 a year. So it's kind of a case of doing good works, quote unquote, is profitable. It's lucrative.
And I believe making more money than even the president of our United States.
Exactly. So the bishops of the church and the church itself are not our adversary. And I don't want to make it sound like we consider them to be. So we should pray that they give a lot of thought to their actions and consider the posture of repentance, maybe, instead of the knee-jerk reaction of attack against those who are shining the light on them. And so in our next episode, we're going to talk about Vice President J.D. Vance and his assertion that the hierarchy of Christian love, which is a bedrock principle in the Roman Catholic Church, is something that the Catholic bishops should be paying attention to instead of just their one-sided look at illegal immigration. And in our third episode, we're going to do something unique in our third episode. We're actually going to do a tutorial on how you can get on the internet and find out some of this information about NGOs, nonprofits, and all that, and who's getting government money and who isn't. And I think that's going to be really interesting because it's not that hard. It can sometimes take a lot of work because some of these NGOs are pretty good about hiding their activities, but a lot of it's on record, and we're going to go through and show how you can dig through and find those things. And then, did you have a comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, and then in our final episode, we're going to actually talk about an experience that we had as church planters in working with migrant workers and trying to thread the needle of getting those workers help from, in this case, it was the Roman Catholic Church, and the challenges we met up with in trying to meet their spiritual needs. And so I hope that you'll have the opportunity to tune in and hear those 3 upcoming episodes.
But I would like to say back to J.D. Vance. So for those of you who saw, if you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to watch the interview where he speaks about the Catholic bishops, the College of Catholic Bishops.
I do think the next episode about J.D. Vance will be a very enlightening one. And so today we've tried to ask why the church is suddenly being so vocal about illegal immigration. And I think obviously we've shown that money could play a large part in that. And so we look forward to having our listeners tune in to our next episode. And until then, be blessed. Thank you for being with us today. Just remember, God is in control, and we know how the story ends.